Greetings to you viewers from across the globe. You're welcome to the show Viewpoint. I'm Odiawa AI for Veegil Media.
Greetings to you viewers from across the globe. You're welcome to the show Viewpoint.
On the show today, we will be talking about the onslaught in Gaza. In recent weeks, it's been bombings and shellings from the West Bank to the Gaza Strip and even in Israel. Now, what is it about the Israeli war with Hamas? Thousands have died and the toll has continued to rise dramatically, even days after the Palestinian militants launched surprise attacks on Israel, which has responded massively by shelling Gaza with heavy bombs day in, day out, night in, night out. Israel said it had recaptured Gaza border areas that were invaded by Hamas militants in recent assaults and was continuing heavy bombardments of the Palestinian enclave from air, land, and sea. In the north, Israel's military also said it had responded with artillery fire and shelling from Lebanon and Syria. Well, what actually is the reason or cause of the conflict in Gaza? Moving on. The Gaza-Israel conflict is a localized part of the Israel-Palestinian conflict. The conflict originated with the election of the Islamist political party, Hamas, in 2005 and 2006 in the Gaza Strip, and escalated with the split of the Palestinian government into the Fatah government in the West Bank, and the Hamas government in Gaza, and the following violent ousting of Fatah after Fatah lost the election to Hamas. Palestinian rockets attacked on Israel, Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, and the joint Egyptian-Israeli blockade of Gaza has exacerbated the conflict. The international community, though, considers attacks on civilians and civilian structures that do not discriminate between civilians and military targets illegal under international law. Now, it's been quite gory from videos which we've seen online concerning the bombings and retaliations, particularly on the part of Israel. Now, is it a case of who is wrong and who is right? Now, could Israel be wrong? Could Israel also be right? Could Hamas, Palestinians, or the Hezbollah, who are also allies of the Hamas Islamic movement, be wrong or also right? Now, let's take a sneak peek on the history of Gaza. Gaza spans over 4,000 years. It was ruled, destroyed, and repopulated by various dynasties, empires, and people. Originally a Canaanite settlement, it came under the control of the ancient Egyptians for roughly 350 years before being conquered and becoming one of the Philistines' principal cities. Gaza became part of the Assyrian army around 730 BC. Alexander the Great besieged the captured the city in 332 BC. Most of the inhabitants were killed during the assault, and the city, which became a center of Hellenistic learning and philosophy, was resettled by nearby Bedouins. The area changed hands regularly between Greek successor kingdoms, the Seleucids of Syria and the Ptolemies of Egypt, until it was besieged and taken by the Hasmoneans in 96 BC. Now, that is a brief history concerning the Gaza Strip. Gaza has also experienced destructive earthquakes, particularly in 1903 and 1914, and in 1917, during World War I, British forces captured the city. Gaza then grew significantly in the first half of the 20th century under the mandatory rule. The population of the city swelled as a result of the Palestinian exodus during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Gaza came under Egyptian rule until it was occupied by Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War. Gaza became a center of political activism during the First Intifada and under the Oslo Accords of 1993. It was actually assigned to be under the direct control of the newly established Palestinian Authority or government. Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza in 2005, and by 2007, Hamas emerged both as the victor in the Palestinian elections and in factional fightings with rival Fatah in the city and in the wider Gaza Strip, has also since then been sole governing authority as it has emerged. Israel subsequently has blocked the Strip and launched assaults against it in 2008, 2009, 2012, and 2014 in response to rocket attacks. And we can see in recent years that this is not actually the first attack in 2023. It has been attacks which has also been ongoing a long time coming, long before now. And now in 2023, as a result of Hamas initiation of the 2023 Israel-Hamas war, it has now escalated into something which has now drawn global attention. Now, who are the individuals known as Hamas? Now, if we would begin to ask, the Palestinian armed group known as Hamas, that is who they actually are, takes its name from an Arabic acronym that is in English, actually stands for Islamic Resistance Movement. That's the IRM. Now, Hamas is also an Arabic word for zeal. Its roots trace back to the late 1970s when activists established charities, clinics and schools in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank after Israel occupied both in 1967. We will see now from the description now, they actually occupied both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And geographically speaking, when we look at the map properly, both territories are at both ends, with Israel caught up in the middle. Now, it's a question of who actually owns these territories. Now, this conflict, could it actually be a conflict of territorial dominance? That's another question, in my own opinion. Hamas was actually formally established in December 1987 by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin after the outbreak of the Palestinian uprising known as the First Intifada. We mentioned that earlier on. The following year, Hamas declared that liberating Palestine from Israel occupation was every Muslim's religious duty. Actually, we can say they were actually trying to fight for their freedom from Israel. Hamas carried out its first attack against Israel in 1989, abducting and killing 2 soldiers, leading to Israel's arrest of Yassin. Yassin will be released later on in 1997 in exchange for Mossad agents who had tried to assassinate Hamas political bureau chief Khalid Mishal in Jordan. Now, moving on, it's been back and forth when it comes to bombing, shelling, and assassination attempts. Now, if you follow my story as we move on, Hamas entered politics in 2005 and won a landslide victory in parliamentary elections the next year, beating its rival Fatah. But the two parties could not work together, Hamas favoring armed resistance, Fatah preferring to negotiate. Now, it's a question of armed resistance or negotiation. In my own view, in my own opinion, whatever it is they are actually fighting for, whatever the conflict is actually setting out for, or actually sprouting its ugly head or roots from the ground, I think negotiation should always be the best form of dialogue in case of seeking a way forward. A year later, disagreements between them led to an armed conflict that would end with Hamas in charge of Gaza, while Fatah held the West Bank. Today, both the European and the United States classify Hamas as a terrorist organization. Now, my question now is, why will world powers always be quick to term a particular group or a particular sect, a particular name, when in fact they have not carried out adequate investigations as regards what the conflict should actually be, or what the root cause of that conflict should actually be? Because if we follow this case now, it's a case of a particular people trying to seek independence from a particular nation, and they are going about it in a particular way, which is violent. And another group is actually going about it in a particular way where they need to engage in dialogue. Now, those who have refused to engage in dialogue appear to be seen as terrorists. Why? Because they've refused to pay attention to the voice of reason. Moving on, while others see it as a resistance movement, over the years, Hamas' reliance on armed resistance has ebbed and flowed, but it has remained committed to its fight for Palestinian self-determination. Now, like I said earlier on, this is what they have been actually fighting for: sovereignty or independence. Everything still boils down to territorial integrity. Now, in my own view, my own opinion, this is what we know about the conflict so far. When I mean the conflict here, I'm talking about the conflict of Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Gaza Strip, the bombings and the shellings, how the assaults also unfolded. Hundreds of Hamas militants actually attacked Israel from around 6:30 a.m. And this is a fact, as seen on various streaming platforms on Saturday. The Jewish holiday of the Simchat Torah, in an assault that came 50 years and a day after the outbreak of the Arab-Israeli war, yes, had taken on. Iran, the Iran-backed Islamists fired thousands of rockets from Gaza into Israel and used explosives and bulldozers to break through the security fence through the blockade of the Palestinian enclave. Using all sorts of means of transportation, from bikes, speedboats, and the lot, streaming into Israel, targeting cities all over Israel. Now, we could see that evidently on platforms as gunmen unleashed a massacre at a musical festival attended by hundreds of young Israelis and foreigners near Kibbutz Rem, close to Gaza. Israel said Hamas took around 150 hostages. They include at least 11 Thais, 2 Mexicans, and some unknown number of Americans and Germans and other nationals. Nigeria is not also excluded, as they had their own nationals or citizens also there. Now, how is Israel now responding to this whole fracas? Israel has actually declared war on Hamas as at Sunday, which we just passed, and has since unleashed thousands of airstrikes on the militia's positions in Gaza. We could see that on different streaming platforms, with the shellings and the refusal of Israel to back down. The defense minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, on Monday ordered a complete siege of Gaza, meaning no electricity, no food, no water, no gas, in a move decreed by the United Nations as a possible violation of international law. Now, if we look at it now, the international body, United Nations, which is a body saddled with the responsibility of perpetuating peace, has actually intervened in the matter. But all these pleas have actually fallen on deaf ears. So now, is it a case of two wrongs don't make a right, or is it a case of I don't want to hear anything at all? The military has massed tens of thousands of troops and heavy armored near Gaza and called up to 300,000 reservists for a campaign it has dubbed Swords of Iron. Now, that campaign now is kind of loud. Swords of Iron, meaning that it's going to utterly unleash mayhem. According to Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, he has warned that his country's military's campaign was only the start of a sustained war and has vowed to reduce to rubble Hamas hideouts in Gaza. Hence, the campaign name, which they actually said about the sword. By Tuesday evening, the United Nations said that the airstrikes had forced more than 260,000 people to flee their homes in the impoverished territories of 2.3 million people, and that's a whole lot. Now, this has been hemmed in by an Israeli-Egyptian blockade for more than 15 years. And wherever there's an issue between particularly the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, Israel, caught up in the middle, begins to serve as this blockade. The Israeli military, meanwhile, said Tuesday that it had largely reclaimed the embattled south and the border around Gaza and dislodged holdouts Hamas fighters from more than a dozen towns and in cities majorly around the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and also in Israel. But late Tuesday in southern Israel, in the Israeli city of Ashkelon. Troops backed by helicopters and drones exchanged fire and several militants, leaving 3 fighters dead and the army, of course, they did the needful what they needed to do. Israel also faced the threat of a multi-front war after days of clashes with the Iran-backed Shiite militant group Hezbollah on the northern border with Lebanon. Now, coming to Hezbollah, there was an exchange of fire between Israeli forces in Syria on Tuesday after Israel's military said munitions were fired towards the Golan Heights, which was occupied since 1967. Now, this territory now has actually been recognized to be owned by Israel as a sovereign state. Now, Trump, a former president of the US, will come up with, in his usual manner of talking unguardedly, I'm not to crucify him. That's his own approach about saying things. But by supporting Hezbollah on the attacks on Israel, now, should we continue to incite these people against each other, or we should look for ways to bring them together to pursue peace with all men or all nations to make the globe a better place for people to live? Now, that's the question. 3 Israeli strikes have also hit the Rafah, crossing with Egypt and only entry points into Gaza, not only controlled by Israel. And we could see that, and that was instigated by the Hezbollah attacks. Now, as the death toll mounts in total, the war has left close to 3,600 people dead in Israel and Palestinian civilians, including soldiers and combatants. Israel says Hamas government have killed more than 1,200 people and wounded over 2,700 in Israeli cities, towns. Now, that is quite sad. That is quite alarming. People are just dying recklessly, unknowingly, and for things they don't even know or wish not to get themselves involved in. Now, it will really be surprising to someone to find out that children who are not even caught up in the whole mess have actually found themselves in this quagmire, whereby they have to live up to all sorts of bombings and shellings, or waking up to gunshots or sporadic fires from whatever guns may be. Now, it's alarming that children will wake up with this kind of environment, and there's nothing to wake up to when it comes to a peaceful environment. Now, my question is, on the Gaza side, the health official said 900 people have been killed and 4,000 wounded. This keeps increasing and rising. The Hamas armed wing, the Azedin, the Al-Qassam brigades, on Monday said Israeli airstrikes on Gaza had killed 4 of the enemy's prisoners in a claim that not to be independently verified. Now, the list is endless as journalists and news sources will keep on reporting all sorts of reports. Now, the question is, where do the international bodies come in? Only the United Nations for now has come to speak up. Now, what does Hamas now have to say about the attack? Now, that was Israel's side of the story. Now, Hamas said it fired 5,000 rockets in an offensive it branded Operation Al-Qassam Flood. Now, why is that? On Monday, it threatened to start killing hostages every time Israel launched a strike on a civilian target without warnings. Now, no one gave you a right to life, but instead, you have ruled out negotiating a prisoner swap with Israel as the military operation is still ongoing. Now, should it be a case of continuous talks? Definitely yes. Now, international bodies on their own part should also come in, like I earlier on began saying, the likes of the United Nations, and probably even bodies which are in charge of perpetuating not just peace alone. International communities, world powers, allies of both nations, they should come on their own part and make sure that they don't just take sides with these nations who are warring against each other. Actually, they should come on board and look for how they can seek the best way and means possible to embrace dialogue and not just instigate these nations against each other. Because if we've been monitoring for years, as I mentioned earlier, The conflict has started as far back as 2005. Even before 2005, it must have been going on, but hadn't brewed into the level at which it has already brewed up to now. Now, the thing is, it's not a question of nations taking sides or aligning with other nations to become allies to provide resources to fight each other. Now, the question is, these nations who are actually aligning with these nations, what do they stand to gain? What do they stand to offer? And the nations who are actually caught up in the conflict, who are aligning with these nations, what do they stand to also gain when their ears are deafened to the word peace? It is on that note I draw the curtain on today's episode of Viewpoint. I'm Odiawa AI for Veegil Media. Thanks for watching.